You're listening to the Coop Homeschool Podcast.
This is your podcast for community, humility, and joyful fun in homeschooling. I'm Mandy.
I'm Jessica.
And this is The Coop.
Today we're talking about socialization.
Ooh, that's a biggie.
Yes, it is. We're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, and how it has the capacity to get homeschool moms riled up like nothing else.
Awesome.
Yes.
I'm excited.
But first, let's do a scoop.
Okay, I'll go first. Today we went to our favorite park.
Okay.
It's local.
Yes.
And it's $3 to get in, which I love.
Right.
Because only people who are intending to be there are there. And it was beautiful, green, lush. There's a whole hiking trail. And for the first time, you won't believe I did this. I allowed my almost 11-year-old and my 9-year-old to go with 11-year-old and another 9-year-old on the hike by themselves.
Nice. Well done.
That was hard. And my homeschool mom friend who I was with was like, I'm kind of a chameleon. Like if the mom I'm with is super free willy, she's like, free willy?
Willy-nilly?
Yeah. I was like, if the mom I'm with is super free willy,
Child of the 90s.
then I totally am more free willy. But if the moms I'm with are more hovering,
right,
then I'm super hovering. And I was like, so I'm a little nervous right now letting them go. And she's like, they'll be fine.
Right.
Like,
There's enough
four
of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're tall enough now. They're big enough. If one got hurt, they could definitely leave one with them.
Right.
Two could come.
Right.
You know. So it was just funny that I was like, oh my goodness, is this happening? You know.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
anyways, that was our and they loved it. They even came home and they're telling, the spouse, oh, we got to go on a hike by ourselves with no grown up.
Yeah. How did your spouse
He's
react?
like, really?
Yeah. I think mine would be like, what?
Yeah. I was like, I was a little nervous about it, but there wasn't very many people there. Oh, there was a lot of people there. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
So they loved it.
Awesome.
What about you?
We did a donut road trip.
Oh, right. What? I should have said that one.
No, we organized a donut road trip for our co-op, and it was based on our book club books of the month, which were The Jelly Donut Difference and How to Eat Fried Worms,
Yeah,
an
that was
old
a fun
favorite
one.
from my childhood.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it ended up being a good read.
Yeah, it was
I wasn't
fun.
sure if it would still hold up over all these years, but it did.
Well,
which
it
is
had the
nice.
feeling of almost, I was telling my husband, like a Stand By Me feeling.
It did.
Yeah.
It was super sweet. Just, these 4 boys and, anyway.
There was a little cruel moment in there where I was like, gasp.
Right. But it wasn't as bad as I was worried it might be.
Yeah, but, and compared to like Stand By Me, it was, but it just, because it was written back in the 70s,
yeah.
so they use like Helter Skelter, and that's when I was like, wait, when was this written?
Yeah. Yeah,
So it was fun.
It was a lot of fun. And then we did a little mini road trip around San Diego County, and our whole co-op tagged along. You even went all in.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Rented that 15-passenger van. Oh, my word. I'm so glad we did that, because the whole time your daughter was in there.
Yep.
We had 2 other moms and their kids in there. And I was really glad we did that, because it actually helped me to envision what the future is going to look like.
Renting 2 of those and taking our whole group somewhere.
Yeah.
Like
Or
a real road trip.
And I was even thinking, like, if 2 moms want to take all the teenage girls
Right.
on an overnighter in Hollywood and go watch a taping of a show and go to the El Capitan and stay in like a couple hotel rooms, that would be so fun, and so just seeing how that worked, how to park and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I was nervous the whole time driving it, because it is quite the length of a van,
Right. And it's a beast. But
it is a beast.
You did it.
I did it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I stayed in my van with my little guy. I made it a special thing because he's still rear facing, and I just didn't want to bother.
Totally.
So anyway, he and I had a blast. He was pleasantly happy to have a special time with Mom. So we listened to the donut playlist and just made a good time of it. So that was
so fun.
that was a fun thing.
It was. It was delicious.
Yes, it was. All right, so let's jump into socialization.
All right.
So I was on a Facebook homeschool group just last week, and somebody posted about socialization, and within an hour, it probably had 700 comments.
Oh, my word.
You know, it was somebody
It is a
saying
hot
like,
button item.
yeah, my family friend asked me how I would socialize my children if we were homeschooled. And then every homeschool mom out there was, oh, let me tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, their thumbs must have gotten really tired.
Exactly.
They got quite the workout.
Exactly. So that's the thing. It's a really big conversation, and I'm not sure what non-homeschoolers think socialization is.
Yeah.
Or the people who are worried about it. I'm not sure what they think socialization is.
Do you think it's they just don't, they want their kids to fit in?
I can't tell. I never can tell if they're really just thinking that homeschoolers don't see other people.
Well, okay, I know.
Right.
When I was younger, the only homeschool family I knew, and I've talked about this on a podcast a long time ago, there was like 13 or kids or whatever, and they were all wearing thrift store clothes, which I know is super cool now, but wasn't back then.
Sure.
And their hair wasn't combed. They looked dirty, and they only talked with each other.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like, like the book Educated. You know, just kind of just backwoodsy.
Right.
You know.
So in that particular instance, so you're talking like 90s, early 90s. And so I think back then, for sure, that was definitely the stereotype of homeschoolers.
Yeah.
So maybe people are stuck in that stereotype of these small families that really don't interact much with society at all.
Right.
You know,
and if you don't meet them, like if you're in the traditional school circuit,
right,
you aren't really encountering a lot of homeschool kids unless you're in another group that might, like I encountered them because my church happened to have a lot of homeschool kids.
Exactly.
And that's when I first started, like my church is an adult.
Right.
Yeah. So that's when I first started encountering like kids that were, you know, clean clothes and brushed their hair and, you know.
Yeah, that one family was actually the anomaly.
It was, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, throughout my dancing days as a child, I met tons of homeschooling families, and those were girls I was actually friends with.
Right.
You know, so to me, there was no challenge of getting to know each other or socializing together. And so I think the real thing that people have when they say socializing is they have this old idea of what homeschooling looks like. They really just still see Little House on the Prairie.
Right.
You know, they do have this odd concept of what a homeschooler comes out to be like.
Well, yeah, and when you think about it, when you don't have two incomes, a lot of times that can mean a totally different lifestyle when you only have one. And back then, maybe the ones who could afford to only have one parent working were the ones who lived in the country.
Exactly.
Who didn't have the Orange County or LA big city prices. And so they weren't even in our cities, you know?
Absolutely. And then now, I mean, in the 2020s,
yeah.
it's not even the 2000s anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fun to say 2000s, but now it's the 2020s, the roaring 20s.
We should have a roaring 20s party.
Yes, we should. The homeschooling is such a more mainstream thing that I think it just feels really absurd to hear this question, to hear this as a reason that people think you shouldn't homeschool your kids.
Yeah, I've been asked, I won't say who it is, but I've been asked by like child psychologists how I was going to socialize my children.
Right.
And I was like, aren't you a child development specialist?
Okay, so let's go there because so socialization isn't just social skills and that kind of thing. Socialization is the act of socializing and learning social norms by interacting in society. I mean, just within your family, that's socialization. Just within your community or your church group or your extended family, that is socialization, let alone if you actually put your kids in activities and other things.
Right.
So in my opinion, most people have opportunities to socialize.
Yeah.
You know, so it's interesting that even a child psychologist would kind of question that.
Yeah, it's really, really surprising.
Yeah. But here's what I also think. I think that we often conflate socialization with how people behave, right? So maybe what people are really saying is, well, maybe if you homeschool, your kids are going to be antisocial. Maybe, but antisocial is a completely different thing.
That's like a disorder, right?
Exactly. It's a personality disorder. I don't think that's
wherever they're in traditional schools or
that has its own risk factors. Homeschooling is not one.
Yeah, right.
Yes. But then do they mean maybe introverted? People who actually just want to keep to themselves, and maybe introverts are more likely to be homeschooled because they have more challenges in social settings?
Well, it's growing up in a traditional school, there is a load of people who are quiet.
Oh, totally.
So, I mean, you can have a quiet extrovert or you can have a loud introvert too.
Yeah, that's what I consider my child and my husband. I think that they are outgoing introverts.
Yeah.
They recharge by being alone and they need that time, and I have to manage that for my daughter. But she has out socially, she is totally fine. She loves hanging out with people. She just needs to recharge by herself.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a whole day. Sometimes it's a whole weekend.
Yeah. I mean, I remember those people at lunchtime sitting by themselves in traditional school.
Right.
And then going over and talking to them, and they didn't want to talk to me.
Right.
Or they gave that off because they were so shy and didn't have social skills. But that was also in a traditional school.
Right.
You don't have to be homeschooled.
No.
To sit by yourself at lunch.
Right.
You know?
So then maybe people don't really mean antisocial, right? Introverts, you encounter introverted people in all walks of life. So that can't be the case.
Yeah.
So maybe they're thinking socially awkward?
Yeah. I mean, that's
where you go next, right?
It's the weird kid, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think about something that's so funny in maybe the last 10 years. People, even in movies, it's become a popular thing to be awkward. You're like, oh, sorry, I'm just awkward. Putting your foot in your mouth all the time. That's like a trope in movies, like the awkward girl.
Well, what are the cool movies called? They're like the indie movies, right?
Right.
Like of the awkward, like the 300 Days of Summer, she's kind of awkward. The Zoe Deschanel's of the world, Yeah.
But do they scream homeschooler to you?
Yeah, no.
No,
yeah.
They just are who they are.
Right.
So I think for homeschoolers, it just feels so offensive to kind of insinuate like that A is a bad thing.
Right.
And then B, that they must have been homeschooled to become that, because it's very obvious by interacting in society that is not the case.
Yeah, I almost never know how to respond when people ask me about that because I'm like, I don't even know what you're asking. Like, do they have friends?
Right.
Yes,
right.
They have friends, and look at how outgoing and friend-making I am.
Sure.
I can thrive helping my kids in that avenue, whether they're in traditional school or homeschooled. And then you also have the parents that we've met that don't have any of those skills.
No.
And their kids are either in traditional school or homeschooled, and they don't help them out in that avenue. And they are the one, they're the ones in the trench coats walking around with their flower bush. I'm just saying, like you still have people who are unique.
Yeah.
And unapologetic about who they are, whether they're in homeschool or traditional school, and the parents do sometimes play a role and sometimes don't. I mean,
because I was thinking you were gonna say, like, we know people who have a hard time socially themselves, adults, moms, who go out of their way to make sure that their kids have places to be social, places to make friends, and their kids are fantastic.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
They're totally social. They know how to make friends. They know what's expected of them within a social interaction. Whether kids conform to that all the time or not is a different story, but I think they understand that. And so
but even the mom though is awkward. But she's fine with that.
Right. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the not knowing how to respond when people say that is really kind of why I wanted to tackle this, because what do people mean? And that's why we went down the list: antisocial, socially awkward, weird. Do they mean that your kids are not going to actually see people? Because all of this to me is absurd.
It is.
And so let's dive deeper into the weird and the conformity and the socially awkward and where we learn these skills from, because really, weird according to whom?
Yeah, let's do that.
Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that there's this idea, and the bubble gets really small. So if you're thinking about where your kids are going to have a hard time fitting in, is you think about traditional school settings.
Right.
You think about high school and junior high and how miserable it is if you don't fit into that social group.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us confident, veteran type homeschoolers, we look at that as this tiny little bubble in our kids' whole world. And why am I going to be worried about them conforming to this bubble or being weird according to these people? You know, why are a bunch of middle schoolers determining what is socially acceptable?
Oh, they shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be. Homeschooled or not, you know, traditional or not. Middle schoolers should not have the ability to say what is and what isn't acceptable behavior within their group.
Well, yeah, and isn't it funny though when you hear parents talking about like fashion and stuff, like on social media, like, oh, my kid says I need to part my hair down the middle, or my kid says I need to stop wearing skinny jeans. It's like, why do you care? They're middle schooler. They're 13.
Right.
You know, why do they even get to give you an opinion about that at all? You know?
Yeah.
They don't know.
So I think that's one of the biggest things is thinking about society as a whole, because I think that's what homeschoolers are really a little more focused on is the true end goal. I want my kids to function in society.
Right.
Not within this tiny little group for the short amount of time
of all peers.
Right. Of all peers of the same age. I want them to know how to talk to an adult. I want them to know how to talk to, you know, somebody who's 85 years old that they're talking to at a nursing home as part of a service project.
Yeah.
I want them to know how to take care of a 2-year-old and talk to them appropriately. You know, I want my kids to socialize with a diverse group of people in order to teach them about what our society really looks like.
I love that. Well, and I've said this before, when I was a junior high teacher, that's one of the main things that turned me on to homeschooling was the kids who were transitioning from elementary homeschool into traditional school. They came through our private school.
Right.
And those are who were saying, hey, how was your weekend? I'm like, what? Why do you want to know about me?
Right.
Well, because I was a person they cared about and wanted to know about.
Right. They don't have these predetermined rules about what you're allowed to say to a teacher because they think you're in a different bubble.
Right.
You know, I don't want my kids to live and only look at their little tiny bubble. I want them to be able to talk to everybody.
Right.
I want them to talk to you.
Yeah. We were just over at someone's house for dinner, and I guess Micah was at the table, and I had walked away, and he turned to the mom and said, so what have you been up to?
He is a great conversationalist.
Aww.
He's definitely an introvert.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when he comes to my house, he talks to my husband like they're just hanging out.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I think he's done the same thing to your
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's just, I mean, he leaves and my husband are like, oh, you know, like it's so sweet that these kids are able to do that. Like that's what I'm raising.
Right.
That's what I want to accomplish is my kids being able to be a member of society, not just a member of their 9th grade. You know, not just a member of the 10th grade. Now, that isn't to say that being aware of what those smaller peer groups deem acceptable or not isn't somewhat important, right?
Right.
If you aren't the type of person who can be unapologetically yourself without some level of internal discomfort, then you might want to know what that peer group is doing or thinking or, you know, that kind of thing. But I don't want my kids to live their life oriented around that.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like my son keeps telling me, like, why do you care about impressing people? And I'm like, I don't, but I guess I do.
Right.
You know?
It's sort of trained into all of us.
It is.
And I'm interested to see what the outcome will be, you know, with our generation of children growing up and seeing if there's a difference or not. I think on some level, just being a member of society, we all become somewhat conscious. It's just a matter of how much we care. And I think that I tend to care a lot because I'm a little less outgoing too. I don't really like attention drawn to myself. So the more I fit in, the less that I stand out.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's more what it is. Or I want to be liked, or I don't want to hurt people's feelings. And that comes with being empathetic as well. And so it all becomes very intertwined.
Well, and it's a skill when you enter the workforce, because if you don't know how to put on certain behaviors, if you don't know how to have that awareness, or if you have that awareness and you're not willing to put on those certain behaviors, you won't get the job,
Right.
or you won't succeed in your job. You won't be promoted. So it's being able to compartmentalize that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, just speaking of the workplace, that's its own bubble.
Yeah.
You know, so again, it is important to understand the I can't think of what I would like to say here, but the goings on of your particular peer group. So I do think that it's important to notice that. It's just a matter of whether you choose to conform or not.
Right. Yeah.
And then at that point, look at how big the world is.
I know.
Look at all those introverted D&D players.
Oh yeah.
God knows, I love a lot of them.
Yeah,
You know,
you do.
They're in my family. You know, my nephew is like a D&D podcaster. He's not introverted though.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes,
gaming.
Yeah. And it's been around since the 80s. If you've watched what's that?
Stranger Things.
Yep. If you watch Stranger Things, you know about D&D.
We should do a Stranger Things theme day. Oh, but our girls have to, the kids have to be older.
Yeah, our kids have not watched Stranger Things. Just to be clear.
In 8 years, let's do that.
But I think that there's a place for everybody nowadays if we can all just get over our own, ideas of what's weird or socially awkward or whatever. I mean, there's a place for everybody.
Yeah.
There's a place for people who only listen to K-pop music, here in America. There's a place for people who are avid book readers and don't do much else. There's book clubs for them. There's people, there's writers clubs. There's all kinds of things for all kinds of people. And so conforming too hard or being too worried about a particular bubble is really limiting.
Yeah.
You miss out on finding your people.
Yeah. And it's so funny how anytime I think of talking to someone about socialization, it's really character development that I end up talking about. And it's a totally different thing.
Right.
But it's funny, I was thinking of how I had to teach my 9-year-old when she really hurt a 7-year-old's feelings the other day. And just without thinking.
Right.
And so then when I was addressing that and having her go and apologize, I was like, this is socialization. Actually, that's character development.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's funny how even that gets intertwined.
It definitely does. And I think that that's what's really important to distinguish when you're talking about this. If somebody is really harassing you about the socialization issue, I think it's really important to talk about, are you worried that I'm not going to teach them to be a good person?
Yeah.
Because if you are, let me tell you how I'm doing that. I've already been teaching them social skills since they were a baby. I mean, who doesn't say hello to their infant 500 times a day?
Or smile at them.
Hi. Yeah.
500 times a day, I know.
At least. I mean, my little guy's only 3, so it's still fresh. I still have to not do those things to him. But it's amazing how integrated into our souls as mothers.
Say bye-bye.
Exactly.
Say bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How long do we have to model please and thank you?
I
You know what I mean?
yeah.
I still do it with my 9-year-old because it's an important thing that I need her to be aware of. And so
well, I have to tell you, when we used to go to a different church, and when we would show up, my daughter's friend sat right in front of us, and she would always turn around and go, and we were always late. So the preaching or the prayer or whatever's already happened.
Right.
So we're signing in incognito, and our friend turns around, hi, and waves, and my daughter would just stare at her.
We're being quiet right now.
No smiling, no anything. And so after a couple times, I'd see her friend turn back around maybe I should have said hi to her, and my heart would break. And so finally I said, when people smile at you, remember to smile back. Even if you're supposed to be quiet, you can still smile.
Right.
And it's okay,
Right. But that's important. So that is teaching them to interact in society, right? It's just a matter of the learning of what's okay or not, and if you hadn't mentioned that to her, who knows what her peer group would say, right? There's this whole culture of mean girls, right?
Totally. Well, she would have been considered the mean girl, actually, because she's just staring her down.
Right. And then at what point does that get reinforced or not by a small peer group, but because you are aware of her social interactions and you are there to help with them, you can kind of thwart those things and improve her character development, therefore making her a better member of society at large, rather than worrying about, are her own friends going to teach her how to interact nicely?
Right, yeah.
Why would you leave it up to a bunch of 9-year-olds to teach them to be nice to each other?
Well, yeah, and she was probably 6 at the time.
Exactly.
I mean, can you imagine?
No. Yeah.
We don't ask other 6-year-olds to teach our kids anything.
No. That's where they practice their skills,
Yeah.
you know, and hopefully in a more diverse range of ages too, because then there's natural leaders that come out of the older kids. There's, you know, opportunities to practice empathy and to practice compassion with the little ones. I think, I mean, we know for sure, we've already discussed this before, but that kids who interact often in more diverse ages, they tend to work towards teamwork rather than competitive play.
Oh, right.
You know,
yeah.
there's the common goal is to just play, you know, whereas too many kids of the same age, they have to find a leader.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's like a wolf pack. Someone's got to be the alpha.
Yeah.
And someone's got to be the weak one.
And either one could be good.
Sure.
You know, they're both
There's
skills.
time for
both.
both.
Yeah. But it's not that homeschool kids aren't learning anything.
No,
you
exactly.
know, they're just learning maybe some other skills because they're surrounded by a broad range of ages, including adults.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting, in doing a lot of my preparation for socialization, it really made me think about, you know, the things that were instilled in me, maybe because I spent too much time in very narrow peer groups, and I became a highly competitive person. You know, I mean, I needed to get the A. I needed to do this. I needed to do that.
Yeah.
I was highly competitive all the time, and not even for myself.
Right.
You know, because once I was homeschooling as a teenager and then enrolled at the community college and beyond, I really learned to just work for myself. And it was crazy.
It's freeing, isn't it?
It's very freeing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I never really articulated any of that until recently. And then think about the workplace. If I dare go here, think about a huge population of people that tends to get easily offended.
Yeah.
Is that because we're so concerned with being the right one all the time, to being super competitive, that we're not willing to listen to bigger groups of people who have different opinions, because we're just so narrow? And most of the people I know think this way, so this has to be right.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love that book, Loser Think, because he goes into that kind of stuff and reminds you to think outside the box of those things and to not conform.
Right. And dare I say that maybe is a problem when your socialization is done on too small a scale.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe if from young ages we're teaching kids to interact with other people, showing respect to older people, you know, along the way comes social skills and character development to teach them to listen and respect others' opinions, you know, and all of these things. Maybe we'd be more receptive and less competitive. Maybe we'd be more willing to work on teams instead of sabotaging our own teammates so that we can still come out ahead. You know, like, I feel like that happens in the workplace still all the time.
Oh, totally. People are sociopaths, it seems like, you know, like
you have a common goal.
Yeah. And then they want all the credit it's pretty crazy.
Right. So I don't know. I'm no psychologist,
well,
but I wonder.
These people get produced somehow.
Right.
And when you think of, we're all taught to conform for over a decade, you know, and to look like everyone else or you get made fun of.
Right.
To act like everyone else or you get made fun of.
Right.
And only recently have certain groups of people been coming out saying, I want to be this way.
Right.
And they're getting heard.
Right.
But what about all the other categories of people?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. We joked about this when we were talking about socialization, and we talked about Screech.
Yeah, totally.
Like, that in the late 80s and early 90s, it was totally okay to make fun of nerds, dorks, dweebs, all of that stuff. That was totally okay.
Yeah, but no one is speaking up for them.
No, because, I mean, I think society has shown us that those people end up oftentimes becoming quite successful.
Yeah, right.
You know, but think of all that they had to go through. You know, like, that is just cruel.
Yeah, it is cruel.
And then now people dress up like dweebs for Halloween. You know, like, I see, like, teenagers.
I still like pretend to push my glasses in my forehead, you know?
Right. I know.
You know, it's just a funny joke that we do.
But maybe if we were less concerned about all of this conformity and fitting in, maybe we wouldn't be making fun of people. And then maybe people who feel marginalized wouldn't feel so.
I know, exactly.
I don't know.
Well, and you wouldn't have all the bullies, because the bullies are hurting people as well, right? So So you still can get bullying in traditional school and in homeschool and even within the family unit.
Absolutely.
So, and it can rotate through as well, from adult to child, from child to child. And so like those people are all hurting, right? But they're having to conform. I mean, think of all the stress.
They can't show their pain.
Yeah. So then they have to conform, and it's survival of the fittest.
Right. Yeah.
So
I don't know. So
there's
we'll get off our
so many
soapbox
tangents you can go. Yeah.
And now you see why the Facebook boards get lit up whenever anyone mentions socialization, because we all have these strong opinions and we all feel like, that's really not what people mean.
Right.
When people are saying they're worried that somebody's kids aren't going to be socialized, that's really not what they mean.
Yeah.
And so what do you really mean? Can you just say what you mean?
I don't think they know what they really mean.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Or they just really don't want to say, aren't you afraid your kid's going to be weird?
Yeah.
And then, because that one's easy to answer, who cares?
Well, yeah, and I was always told in traditional school that I was weird. Because I was pep commissioner, and I'd go around trying to motivate people to come to the pep rallies.
Right. And doing a little boogie dance next to them.
I would. Yeah, and I was more extroverted than the average Joe extrovert, you know? So their response to me, and probably feeling a challenge or pressure, was, you're weird. And then I always figured out to say, well, I'd rather be weird than ordinary.
Right.
And so,
and then they'd go,
yeah, proved my point. You just proved my point. And, but, I think now if someone were to say, what about socialization? I'd say, I love who my kids are becoming.
Yeah.
And they love who they're becoming.
Right.
So is there a problem with that?
Right.
Yeah. The whole, you've mentioned this before, the unapologetically themselves, I love so much. And someone was just posting how, mean kids need to, learn not to be mean. And I was like, yeah, so I guess the only time people who are unapologetically themselves, if they're mean, then they do need to apologize. Right. But other than that, we want them to be who they are, even if it is weird to somebody else.
Yeah.
As long as they're kind,
Right. Exactly. Yep, I agree. So obviously we've already talked a ton about how homeschoolers socialize. I'm not even sure we need to talk about it.
Right. I mean, we have our co-ops.
Very obvious. Yeah. Co-ops, we're all
our family, our own family, game night. I mean, just sitting around the table, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Social, there's clubs, there's activities after, extracurriculars, there's all kinds of interest groups, so we were saying too, maybe it really comes down to the parent needing to make sure they find opportunities for their kids. Maybe they have kids who require more social time than others, which again is a kind of a different type of topic, but on the same thread, right? And so if they need more social time, find more social interactions for them.
Right.
Find more opportunities. Diversify them. You know, like there's opportunities to do service projects. Go to that nursing home, read books to people, or go somewhere.
Well, they say books too. What's so great about reading books is it gives them other people's perspective.
For sure.
And so then they actually do have a better understanding of people the more that they read, because they are seeing the world through different lenses, and they can actually meet people where they are better.
Exactly. And actually, going back to that book, How to Eat Fried Worms, I think it's very important to diversify the books that you read. If you read too many books about narrow age groups and the kids who interact this way that we pulled our kids away from intentionally, then you have to be careful, and that was part of the reason I was trying to spread out Harry Potter a little bit too, is because I didn't want her to normalize all of these things at such a young age. And again, like we're reading it through something else. So who cares where it comes from? It's still coming. But the idea is there. And so I just need to still be more diligent about that, because I want her to see a more diverse world, a more diverse social interaction, amongst people, and not just see that, kids this age, they all act this way, and that's okay for you too.
They all say Leviosa.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I do it in my normal day,
Right.
Well, I was thinking about How to Eat Fried Worms, going back to that. And there was at that point where it was a really big bully moment where Billy could have died being put in a cistern, right? So I talked about that with the kids, and I said, here's what happens. all of those kids are good kids.
Right.
They're made in the image of God. They're made with purpose and calling. But when someone gets desperate, they do terrible things.
Right.
No matter how good they are. It throughout history, we have seen that throughout and start talking about the Holocaust even. Like when people are in survival mode and they can only see one thing, they do some crazy, wicked things.
Yep. We are all
that's
sinners.
Totally out of their character. Yeah. And so you can't really ever put it past, like, you think of an animal, if it's desperate, that if it's afraid, that's something to be afraid of. Right. And so when this character in the book, Alan, got afraid and desperate, he was doing things that even the more sneaky, the sly fox kid was like, wait, what?
No,
do you hear what you're saying? Do you really want to do this?
Yeah.
And so I got to talk about that with the kids and really say, watch out for that too in your own self when you get desperate, and also in the people around you, whether it's a child or an adult.
Right.
So it was a really neat conversation we got to have because of the book.
Exactly. And I think that's what's really important. And I think that's where maybe homeschoolers might even have a leg up on being able to speak into those. I read the books along with my kids. I know what she's reading. I read all the Percy Jackson books, which was actually really fun because there's a whole camp for people who are different, and they typically are dyslexic and ADHD because they are demigods. They're the half-bloods of, Olympians and
interesting,
and or Greek gods and humans. And so anyway, it's just interesting. So instead, they have their own cool school where they're all the same, and so it kind of, like, it doesn't glorify that type of, stuff. Yeah. But at the same time, it's this idea that, you're unique in your own way, and these are the ways that you're special, and so it was kind of a change from it always being, the nerds, or the bad kids or something like that. Yeah. So
that's
it's kind
cool
of
school.
It's cool school. It's kind of a cool little way of doing that. And again, that's just a narrow little group of kids, but at the same time, it's just neat to have different perspectives and to see things differently. So.
Well, and I like what you said, diversify.
Right.
Just have a variety of potential interactions in their life, and that exposure, you being there for a lot of it, you can breathe life into it, you can flesh it out for them, you can help them navigate it, so then they know what they're looking at in the future.
Exactly. All right. That's all I had about socialization.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm sure we'll have more to say in future
podcasts. We'll listen back to this and go, I didn't say this.
Yeah, no.
But don't worry,
it's
we'll
a
probably
fun
make it a blog.
Discussion. Yeah.
We'll put everything we didn't say back into the blog.
Yeah.
All right, so what kind of joys did you have?
Okay, so my kids started private golf lessons.
Right.
So they've had 2 now. Okay. And what's really cool is my husband was saying he and the coach have seen a huge amount of growth.
Wow.
So super excited about that. And then my older one and my youngest one got to do a par 3 course, and my older one had already done it, but got to go with the grandparents one time, and then they went together the other day. And so I really see this sport, growing in them, and I love that, especially because it's literally 2 minutes from our house.
That's
the golf
awesome.
course.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it makes it
cool.
easy. And then the par 3 is like, it's at Welk Resort actually. So it's
nice.
like 30 minutes from our house, but it's still like close enough, you know? So it's, and my husband found the cheap time. If you go after the 1 o'clock hour, it's only $15 a person. So it's not an expensive. So we only bought golf lessons for 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then we wanted to see if it could translate, translate into
for one or all, or
and how if they were really coachable kids, in this genre.
Sure.
So, but it brought me joy that they really got to see my husband really got to see the growth.
Yeah.
And see the payoff of that.
That's really cool.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, my little guy August is in the Y phase.
Oh, fun.
Yes. So I'm using this as a joy to even reframe my own mind about this, because there's moments where it's hard, where he's just literally saying why, and continuing to say why just because, and he
That's so
doesn't really
funny.
care.
I never really had a kid that did that on a regular basis.
Yeah, he definitely does it to poke at you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whereas my daughter definitely asked a lot of whys. She didn't use it to poke at me very often. But yeah, my little guy, he is definitely curious about the world around him.
Yeah.
And then I do think that there is some level of him trying to understand things. I do think he thinks kind of similarly to me. Like, I want to know why you actually made that decision, because, you know, like, I need to understand for next time, you know, because he is so sensitive. We tend to want to learn those things about people so that we can avoid a negative interaction next time. And so I'm actually very curious to see if that's what these whys eventually become, or
Right.
if it's just that curious phase of life where everything is why.
Yeah.
You know, Augie, will you please go put that in the trash? Why?
Yeah.
Because we clean up after ourselves when we're all done.
Oh my word.
Why? Oh, because if we didn't, yes, it seems endless, but it's an opportunity
Yeah.
to speak into him
Oh,
and to,
totally.
you know,
Yeah.
give him my lens about the world and, you know, about our family and all
I mean,
that
he's
stuff.
totally open to it. He's asking you.
Right. So whether he's taking it in or just
Yeah.
saying why, just to say why, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that as an opportunity.
I love that. Yeah, especially because those years are fleeting. You know,
For sure.
I mean, they're not going to want to. They're not going to be asking us why. You know, in a few years. Yeah.
That's
They'll
what
just
we'll
be
get
annoyed.
instead. Yeah.
Yeah, my son. You know, I'm already seeing them
It's coming.
notice things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
coming for
yeah,
sure.
It's funny.
Yeah. That's it.
All right.